Hello, Jonny Long here. I'm in the slightly odd position of reading out an advert about how we have no adverts on Escape Collective. Now, I don't think all ads are evil, but I definitely prefer our little world to exist without them. Our website is so clean, and our podcasts are blessedly free from any messages imploring you to buy some green gloop that would definitely make its way through your system quicker than the time it took to put your credit card details in to buy 6 months worth of the stuff. The trade-off here, in order to keep things nice and pure, is we need you, yes you, the person listening, to sign up to become an Escape Collective member. That's the only way we can make this membership-funded model work. We don't have to go with our begging bowl to marketing executives like the vast majority of cycling media do. I will not drink the green goop. You can't make me. If you are already a member, thank you so much. You are appreciated beyond words. And if you know someone who's on the fence about signing up, why not give them a friendly little nudge? Hey, if we sign up enough members, maybe I will drink the green goop after all. Go to escapecollective.com/member to sign up.
How do we have a successful Tour de France? What's the broad plan?
Richard is the most expensive rider that we've ever had on this team by a fair margin. His success or failure, it does put the entire team in the balance. It's a big play.
Now Jonas is the number one guy.
Yeah.
And you're the one who has to attack him.
No.
I should have followed the thing. I'm sorry.
I'm just angry because I miss it, but
Yeah,
I'm not angry with how we ride it. But fuck! 2 days in a row.
Welcome back to the Unchained Binge podcast, everybody. We're back for our second year because the Netflix Unchained series is back for its second year. I'm Caley Fretz. I'm joined today by Jonny Long. Welcome, Jonny.
Hello, yes, I've got a Netflix account.
And Kit Nicholson. Do you have a Netflix account?
I do indeed.
Wow, congratulations. We're going to talk about the Netflix series Unchained. For those, I guess, not aware, if you stumbled upon this, it's an 8-part series. It just dropped this week, actually, in the sort of middle of June here. And we're in our second year of the series. The three of us make a podcast more regularly over on the Escape Collective podcast network. If you want coverage of the Tour de France, if you are into the Tour, if you're looking to get as close to the Tour de France as you possibly can, actually, Jonny and I are headed to France in not too long to go cover it from the ground. Make sure you head over to the Escape Collective pod network. Check out all the shows that we do over there. But this one's all about a little Netflix show. Kit, a synopsis, please, of episode 1.
Of episode
Unchained, season 2.
Yeah, well, the opening episode is incredibly jam-packed with storylines that we will follow throughout the series, while also helpfully offering viewers a chronological view of the first few stages, which is a diversion from last year. It was a little bit more haphazard. But yeah, so before we got to the race itself, though, in this episode, there are 2 major storylines introduced. One is the rivalry between Pogačar and Vingegaard, and 2 is the risk of crashes, which begins with the tragic death of Gino Mader a few weeks before the Tour.
All right. Yeah. I have some news. Huh? Some news. What? Gino. Did he? Yeah. Right. Oh no. Oh no. Fuck.
It's a rough way to kick off, but at the same time sets up, I think, it sets up the narrative of not only just the series, but of the whole sport, right? It sets the stakes for the sport. It sets professional stakes and it sets personal stakes for the sport. And if you're just getting into cycling, you're just getting into watching the Tour, I think understanding that is really, really important, right? Like, yeah, I was deeply uncomfortable watching the section on Gino Mader in the beginning of the episode. It was emotional. It brought back, memories that I didn't particularly enjoy reliving. But I also think that sort of setting the scene for the sport as a whole, which is a sport where, Gino's not the first professional rider to have lost his life in a bike race, right? I think that is I don't know if important is the right word, but it is certainly
poignant.
effective. It's poignant, yeah. So I wanted to go straight to you two and ask, what was your sort of first impressions of episode 1? We're 2 years in now. What were the sort of overarching thoughts coming out of the first episode?
Well, I mean, yeah, to just elaborate on that, discomfort in watching reliving the coverage of Mader's crash. I found myself suddenly, and I knew it was coming, I found myself really emotional. And so that was a big kind of realization. And I guess it's just that it's such a big part of the sport and we're so aware of it. But I think one of the biggest takeaways from the episode is, thank goodness UAE is involved this year. It makes such a difference to have both of them, both Vingegaard and Pogačar, he was seen because he was such a big player last year, but because his team wasn't involved in the documentary, he wasn't, we didn't get interviews. And this year we've got the perfect rivalry between the two of them.
Jonny, takeaways from episode 1?
I enjoyed how, the problem is we're coming at this from a point of view of where we spend most weeks watching racing, right? So last year we had to sit through the explanations of how it all worked. And we didn't really get my favourite part, which is all the narratives, where this year it's very clear it's been pitched to us as a battle for the heart and soul of the Tour de France between Jumbo-Visma and UAE Team Emirates. We had some amazing shots of them all at Recon. It was just, it was much more linear. Like they actually set the scene like when you're watching like a normal TV show and not some new Netflix series everyone's very excited for. And then when they're watching it, they're trying to piece together actually what's happening. The Gino Mader stuff, I think it was important to cover because obviously last year they'd already made the show when it was being like I think Gino Mader probably died within weeks of it being released. So there wasn't.
It was Tour de Suisse last year, so
exactly.
It was two weeks ahead of the Tour de France. Yeah, 2 weeks ahead of the Tour,
and
roughly.
When there'll be lots of discussion from people who follow the sport of how much it should have been covered, and like the obsession with crashes. But I think it's important to put ourselves in less like specialist shoes. Like if I think back to when I first started getting into the Tour, I would only tune into the Tour de France every single year. And then I would find out on day one, like who the new world champion was just by like looking at who was wearing the jersey in the peloton. So while the Gino Mader story is very sad and very tragic, I imagine there's lots of people who only tune in for the Tour de France that wouldn't have known about that. And it is something that's definitely shaped our sport and has definitely affected the riders in the Tour de France.
So last year, there was a similar opening, right? There was a lot of crashes. There was a lot of crashes in like sort of the highlight reel, the teaser reel that came out ahead of the show last year. It felt last year more gratuitous to me than it did this year. And maybe that's because, the loss of Gino was so poignant and so had such an incredible impact on the peloton. Whereas like, let's be kind of honest, the average crash in pro cycling doesn't really impact the peloton. Right? Because they're so frequent. Guys are crashing basically every single stage of every single Tour de France for 100 years now. So focusing on them felt very gratuitous because crashes are not actually the thing that we focus on all that much in pro cycling. So it felt wrong in some way. But to return to the sort of setting of stakes question, which I think, again, was for me the sort of purpose of the entire first episode, is to really set the stakes for personal and professional reasons for each of the sort of main characters that we'll talk about in a little bit. I think that from that perspective, this first episode was incredibly effective. One of the first shots we get, and this isn't too surprising given the fact that this is a French produced show, the executive producer, the director, like they're all French, right? It was produced by like essentially Netflix France. And one of the first shots we get is Julien Alaphilippe with his like kid, right? His family. And that, I think, is another step toward kind of setting the stakes of the sport, right? We have this sort of back and forth between the horrible crash with Gino Mader and just crashes in general, right? There is a bit of a crash highlight reel at the beginning of the show. And then this individual with his family, with Marianne Roos, with his little son, I think it was Nino, right? And that it was for me anyway, it was very humanizing. It was a way to humanize the athletes that they're going to be showing over the next 8 episodes, I think, in a really effective way.
And there were a lot of tears. One of the bits that really got me was, seeing that neutralized stage after the day that Maida passed away at Tour de Suisse, or on the day that he died in the hospital. The riders on his team, his fellow Swiss riders, just riders in the peloton comforting each other, and Stefan Kung hugging Maida's mother. There was it's that humanizing thing. It's that these, and what Alaphilippe said about they are incredibly vulnerable on the bike, but they're at the end of the day, Alaphilippe's a dad, Maida was a son. They're all just all just humans like the rest of us, and they risk it, but it's a huge thing.
Let's get into some of the characters that we meet in this first episode. And again, anybody who is a hardcore cycling fan is going to know who all these people are, but I think we can provide a little bit more kind of context and a bit more background on why they're probably included. So the first and foremost are sort of our 2 primary yellow jersey protagonists, right? We've got Tadej Pogačar and Jonas Vingegaard. We talked about that already, Kit. That is the yellow jersey narrative. That is the narrative for the overall victory. That's one that's going to continue to come back over the next 8 episodes, right? We know that because we know how the tour ended up. We already know how this particular series ends. Next up was Ben O'Connor, which I thought he was part of the previous series as well, but an interesting choice for sort of heavy inclusion in this one.
Well, I think part of that was the humanization thing. I mean, the fact that these are bike riders who know each other, but that, they have personalities and they grapple with certain thoughts and processes, and they're affected by more than just the bike race. And, to bring it back again to Maida, O'Connor was clearly pretty affected by that. And so it does set up, it feels very distasteful to say, Maida's crash sets up a narrative, sets up the stakes. Unfortunately, the fact is that it did, and they do that in the documentary.
I think it kind of awakened a little bit of fragility in everyone.
And the fact that it's emotional, it does just build into the storyline. But yeah, I think and part of what we've got to acknowledge as well is that O'Connor is also the leader of one of the teams who are involved in the documentary. Well, there are 8 teams that are involved out of a possible very many teams. And
it's a French team.
A French team. It was going to be O'Connor or Felix Gall, who'd just done pretty well at the Tour de Suisse, but he wasn't yet. He hadn't spoiler alert, won a Tour de France stage yet. So so O'Connor was the de facto leader. So yeah, you've got to introduce it with some French. You've got to introduce some more of the personalities, and he's not the sort of big personality like Pogačar, who just says, "I'm going to go win this thing," or Vingegaard, who says, "The only person I'm watching is Pogačar."
Well, at least Connor is like showing his personality, like he's there on the bus, like losing it, and even in episodes to come, like he's on the team bus, just absolutely furious and pissed off with like the world and everyone, which is kind of what you need, right? You need these characters. That's humanizing, to show that they get frustrated and that they are like on some sort of mental knife edge between just absolutely, almost having a tantrum, which sounds like a harsh thing to say because they're under incredible pressure, but you need that. Like Jonas Vingegaard, very together for a lot of the time. Pogačar also like plays his cards quite close to his chest all the time, even though he's like the sort of mean lord that everyone loves. Like you don't necessarily see him like running onto the bus and like screaming an expletive. Like he brushes it off, but I'm sure like they're all going to have the moments. It's just how much they let us see.
Another couple of characters that were quite heavily used in this episode, or not heavily used, but definitely central characters, were Pidcock and Wout van Aert, who both put some pennies into the swear bucket. But yeah, it's just that it's that kind of letting out of emotions. I suppose that was a bit of a theme.
How happy or upset or worried do you think Wout van Aert will be that almost all of his naked body was shown on television? Like that was. For a second I was like, oh my god, that's a bit much. Like you can choose your camera angle, like go and close it in on his head a bit, please. Don't need that.
Yeah, it was a lot, wasn't it?
The towel was working.
But these are cyclists. They wear lycra. He's been known to wear a full yellow skin suit. It's there is always a risk of exposing yourself on live television. So
probably if the cameras weren't there, he would have just been naked. Like they spend half their lives just naked.
Possibly.
It doesn't matter to them.
They really do, actually. Yeah. They're like, yeah. I remember speaking with a female press officer last year, 2 years ago about this, and just saying that like she just doesn't dare to ever go on the team bus because like there's a 90% chance of somebody being naked on it at any given point in time. So not really particularly unusual in pro cycling, particularly men's pro cycling. So Pidcock, he's sort of this precocious talent, right? Like that's the way that they're framing him at the moment. And I think that we're going to see more of that over the coming episodes. We certainly know that he has a good ride or two later in the tour. We've got Wout, who again we got a bit of a sort of fatherhood thing going on. We've got shots of his pregnant wife and all the rest, and how that adds a bit of an element of drama to his early race and his need to, or his attempt to try to get a stage win really early because he might be headed off at any point in time. And then one of the other characters that I thought it was interesting that they included so much of him, and I think we're going to give him an award later actually. Is Jonathan Vaughters. And Jonathan Vaughters, for me, that the purpose of him was to bring in sort of the big picture team drama, right? Jonathan Vaughters, of course, the general manager of the EF Education Easy Post team, former professional, has been running the team for a very, very long time. And I think, Johnny, you said it best when you said that JV understood the assignment in this particular episode, and I think understands the assignment in general with this show, which is, he's willing to kind of say things where we step back and we're like, I'm not sure if that's really how it is, but he sets up the team and financial drama behind the whole Tour de France. And the fact that this is the biggest race in the world, it's kind of the only thing that matters to these teams, and certainly often the only thing that matters to their sponsors. And so he's kind of that bridge between those two concepts, I think.
We've won pretty much every single major race in the world except the Tour de France.
Welcome, everybody, to Bilbao.
This year, I want to produce the biggest dark horse win of the Tour de France in the last 2 decades.
So, how do we have a successful Tour de France? What's the broad plan?
2023 is going to be a big year for us.
We have the only rider in the world that could actually challenge the 2 favorites for the Tour de France.
Not to me, I'm going to make a grand sweeping generalization because that's kind of what I do. It's good to have like an American in there who gets the sort of sporting documentary thing. Like he's watched like NFL Hard Knocks. He knows that he knows that professional sport is a sales pitch. You have to sell it to get the eyeballs to then make it all work. So, when he says like he's put everything on the line signing Richard Carapaz and taking him to the Tour.
Yeah. Richard is the most expensive rider that we've ever had on this team by a fair margin. His success or failure, it does put the entire team in the balance. It's a big play and it's a big risk.
He's probably invested a lot, and if it all goes wrong, then it probably does lessen his authority a bit, or he'll be questioned the next time he wants to, sign someone. But it's not like a traditional like MLB or NFL team where there's a board or an owner who's just after one season and like, you're out of a job. Like that is Jonathan Vaughters' team, even if he doesn't own it and he's sold it to the sponsors, which is a whole other thing. Like he's that team. His job is probably fine.
That's worth mentioning. His job is definitely fine. It is sort of the context around that is, that was one of the things that kind of perked my ears up when Jonathan Vaughters said something about, sponsors being displeased with you lose Carapaz on day one kind of thing. It's like the sponsors of his team own the team.
They signed off on it.
So they signed off on it. Like it's a bit again, JV understood the assignment, I think is the best possible way to put it. But I do think that, he serves an important function, which is to bring in that sort of, there is drama, there's personal drama, there's sort of professional athlete drama, and there's like whole sport drama, right? And all those things kind of combine in this first episode.
The episode's called "No Risk, No Reward." So we've got risks of crashes. We've also got the risks to a team, and once a crash happens, he's framing that risk slightly differently. And yes, it might be a lot of exaggeration, or a bit of exaggeration at least, but it's another way of framing this risk that they have in bike races.
Yeah, and like the thing he described Richard Carapaz, who like seems like a great dude, like great bike racer, but he framed him as the best transfer coming into a team that year, which I was looking at the transfers and I was like, okay, you can make that argument. The only other one is maybe Adam Yates, who went to UAE Team Emirates from Ineos, who's like a huge addition, and did win that stage and first yellow jersey. And then he also said he's the only guy that could potentially take it to Vingegaard and Pogacar. But I couldn't remember, because it's a year ago, if that's how we remembered him. I think we were just like, look, it's between those two, as we are this year, right? Maybe they both fall off or they come in undercooked and then Carapaz has a chance. But he won, what year did he win the Giro? 2019? And the Giro is like a completely different beast. We see it with Jai Hindley in episode 2. Like there's a huge gulf in between being able to win the Vuelta or the Giro, the other two Grand Tours, and win the Tour de France.
Yeah, I mean, he came third in 21, which was the year that Pogacar won his second tour, and the year that Roglic was meant to be the leader for Vingegaard, and Vingegaard had lost time helping out Roglic, so it was a weird year in itself. I mean, I think he won a stage as well, didn't he? But he was pretty darn good. But since then, he hasn't really threatened a Grand Tour podium.
Carapaz is a very, very, very good bike racer, but just for a bit of context there, I mean, if you pulled up the sort of UCI rankings ahead of the Tour and just sorted it by GC riders, he's below Ben O'Connor and right ahead of Louis Meintjes, who has not done anything in GC in a very, very long time. So I think that's overselling a little bit, but I guess sort of for further context, that's the way that Jonathan Vaughters and EF have always had to operate, because they are not one of the richest teams in the sport, and they kind of have to operate on the margins, and they kind of have to hope that they get a bit lucky sometimes, and they clearly weren't lucky at the start of the 2023 Tour de France.
To be fair, if he had, just to correct myself, he was in the pink jersey until stage 20, was it, of the 22 Giro before Jai Hindley pounced. So he did. So he has actually. That was the year after he came third at the Tour. But again, as we said, the Giro is a different beast, and Pogacar has his first Giro d'Italia was this year. Vingegaard, I don't know if he's ever done the Giro. It's the different sort of.
So he came from Ineos before he got to EF, where he probably had a good salary there. He's then become EF's most expensive rider. I think Vaughters might have even said ever. Which is obviously, they're not paying, maybe they'll be paying like similar to Ineos, otherwise Carapaz wouldn't have gone there. But when Carapaz won his Giro, I have been told that he was actually earning, I think, World Tour minimum at the time. So he was earning not in the six figures, and he won a Giro d'Italia.
That's World Tour minimum is like, I think it's
I think it's more now, but like in 5 years ago, I think it was like 40, 45. Yeah. So I mean, that's crazy to have achieved that and have been paid that to do that. So I'm just glad that Richard has got his bag. So well done, Richard.
I was a little surprised. If you would ask me to guess who was the highest paid ever on EF, I would have said Rigoberto Urán. But I think that Rigo's contract was really heavily incentive based, so like performance incentive based, and so and then he did okay, but probably didn't hit some of those markers to get the big payouts. What did we learn from this episode? So we covered the whole Tour de France last year. We're on the ground. We're talking with riders. We're talking with directors. We're talking with all sorts of folks. So I don't think there's not necessarily a ton that should surprise us in these episodes. But was there anything? Was there anything that surprised you guys that you think is accurate, that you think isn't drama for drama's sake from Netflix, but is like an actual accurate sort of back and forth?
One of the things that I found stood out to me was the conversation between Van Aert and Vingegaard in the bus after stage 2, when after Victor Lafay had done a really late attack and Van Aert had been unable to to catch him in what was meant to be a sprint or a reduced sprint. And so what happened on the bus was, Jonas had attacked with, or Pogačar had attacked with Vingegaard over the top of the Jezkabel climb.
Ijskabel.
Ijskabel. But Vingegaard was working for Van Aert that day, so we knew that already because we saw it happen. He didn't do any pulling. But then on the bus afterwards, Vingegaard was it seemed almost quite remorseful that he had failed to follow Lefay when he attacked under the Flamme Rouge, and he was quite apologetic to Van Aert. And that was, we know that Vingegaard is not an arsehole. He's quite a quiet, restrained character.
Oh, no.
I should have followed Lefay.
No.
I'm sorry.
No. I'm just angry because I miss it, but
Yeah.
I'm not angry with how we ride it. But fuck! 2 days in a row.
I have the feeling that I could have done something to help him. And yeah, that's something that I would have, if I would do it again, I would change it.
Yeah. It will come.
It will come, man.
It was interesting to see that really explicit moment of, co-leadership with Van Aert. Obviously, they're not the same. It's not co-leadership like two GC riders, but it's that sort of the dynamic within the team where they respect each other and they're working for each other.
Well, and the pundits in sort of the immediate aftermath of that stage, when we were sort of breaking down the sprint, it was really obvious that Jumbo-Visma, and my brain is going to be totally confused calling them Jumbo-Visma when they're now Visma-Lease Bike, and I just finally got my head wrapped around the name change. But anyway, apologies in advance if we get that one backwards. It's all the same team. They just changed names from last year this year. So the punditry after the stage was very much focused on if Vingegaard had taken one big pull, Wout van Aert probably would have won that stage, right? But as we heard in the show, we heard Grisha Neerman, the director sportif, we heard him say, follow Pogačar, right? Now, granted, the timing of that, was that on the previous climb? Was that coming into the finish? Like, we don't actually know when that was said, but assuming that the directive was just follow Pogačar around, you can't really blame Vingegaard for doing exactly what he was essentially being asked to do by his director. At the same time, a bolder rider, Pogačar, for example, probably would have clocked that pretty quickly and taken that pull and gotten the win for his teammate. So I think that the punditry immediately after that stage was actually kind of on the nose. Like, it was a bit of an error, whether it's a team error or a Vingegaard error. I think that there's some question marks still around that. But I certainly, to see that sort of like the discussion that we were having that day reflected in the show, I liked that, because I think that last year, one of our primary issues with this show was that some of the stuff that felt very dramatic in the moment was skipped over, and then stuff that wasn't actually that dramatic in the moment was kind of highlighted and inflated. And to me, so far, episode 1, this year feels like a more accurate representation of where the drama actually lied.
The drama last year with that incident was mostly fueled, as it usually is, by the Belgian press, who, if there's a chance of a Belgian rider, specifically one as big as Wout van Aert, if there's a chance of them winning and they don't win and it's potentially someone else's fault who's contributed to it, then that is, they're, sharpening their pens and their pencils and their pitchforks, and they're demanding answers of who let down their Belgian boy. So that was the context there, that, there's a whole cottage industry of slightly manufactured drama, basically the whims of the Belgian people.
Should we get to our Easter eggs and then our awards in this first episode? Jonny, you gave us one of your Easter eggs already.
Yeah. Sorry, the only thing I was going to say about the biggest takeaways from the episode is, sorry, I was like listening to the podcast instead of contributing. It's about how there is a real rivalry and sort of a psychological battle between UAE and Jumbo-Visma, which I think probably stems from them just having the two riders who, if they arrive in top form, are the only ones who have a chance of winning the race. But they try and downplay it quite a lot, because you don't want it to spill over into, the media, or you don't want it to affect like what you're doing. And also you have like Pogačar and Vingegaard are very good at showing respect to each other. Like, we've kind of left that era of sports where you have like bitter rivalries, at least in like European sports. I think like European football is not the same as it once was. You still have it in, I guess, the American major sports, but especially cycling, you used to have like proper sort of feuds, I think. Whereas now there's a lot more of like, they shake hands and one of them waits for each other. They don't like attack when the other's going for a nature break. So there's like a healthy respect, but they are also there, like almost like winding themselves up with what the other's planning to do to try and beat them. And that's interesting to see, I think, because we haven't had that at the tour for a long time, where there are two guys who are pretty evenly matched, and it sometimes stems on tactics or if one of them comes in undercooked. So that was a big takeaway, and it makes you excited for this year, right? Because it's the same thing we get to repeat. It's like a 7 series game or 7 series finals. We've gone through and I looked for Easter eggs and maybe some stuff we can give context on. And there was one thing that I saw which I wanted to ask about, if you knew, Caley, was we see when we're getting the whole Richard Carapaz story, and he's like doing an effort at the end of a training ride, and he comes to a stop, and then one of his coaches comes up, and you can see him like take like a prick of blood from his ear, like you know, like how a diabetic would often like test their blood. It was like that, but on his ear. So what is that, like testing his vitals or what's going on? I don't know. It was weird.
It's testing his lactate. So the essentially the concentration. I'm not a scientist, not a physiologist, but yeah, essentially testing the concentration of lactate in his blood at that point in time. And I forget what exactly it's in like grams per millimole or something like that. And certain levels are basically they're trying to figure out how much lactate he's producing at various outputs. And it's one of the sort of primary indicators of how good a rider can be. Not only in terms of like, you know, how hard can you go for 20 minutes, but really low lactate production can indicate, you know, you're gonna recover better. You're gonna do less damage. You're essentially remaining aerobic, so using oxygen to do the work longer. So it's a super common thing, and in particular, sort of in the early season training camp kind of space where, you know, coaches will go out. Everyone will do similar efforts, and they'll do a little lactate test at the top and see what those numbers are, and it can kind of helps them track fitness, basically. So that shot was definitely like a pre-Tour de France sort of training day, and they're just figuring out where Carapaz stands at that point.
Obviously, a massive shame that Richard Carapaz crashed. And you can see how much it affected him, because these guys spend like 6 months training for this one race. So they'll go to other races, but it doesn't really matter in the same way that going to the Tour does. But the one thing about Richard Carapaz, and you have it with other like the big popular South American riders, and Richard Carapaz from Ecuador, which doesn't have, like, he's their best rider, at least for a while, and by far the best.
Well,
not going to the
he's
Olympics.
not going to the Olympics this year, but
GC terms anyway.
So you have the whole Ecuadorian European contingent arriving at the Tour to support their guy, and the support largely means that they crowd around the bus just chanting Richard over and over again with like a few musical instruments too. So if you need to interview at the end of a stage one of the EF riders, not only do you have to like push through them all, when then they don't want to move, they're there for Richard Carapaz, and they don't care that I'm trying to get quotes off some other random dude. So you have to push through them, find the rider who's obviously hiding on the bus away from these crazy fans. And then when you do eventually get to talk to them and you're trying to record the audio, when you listen back to it, all you can hear is them chanting Richard. So that was one silver lining of Richard Carapaz and being at the Tour, is that it was mercifully quiet at the EF bus for most of the rest of the race. Because it is a lot. Like, it's fun to see that sort of fandom at a bike race. But it's fun to see it like once or twice, like every day for 3 weeks. It gets a bit old. It feels mean-spirited of me to say, but I'm just speaking my truth.
It's your experience.
Yeah, the Colombian fans when Nairo Quintana and Rigoberto Urán, etc. Actually, with EF as well, with Rigo, right? The Colombian fans were also just fantastic, right? Bringing out all sorts of musical instruments and drums and chanting and flags, and, you know, like, really adds an element to the Tour de France, but does make it slightly more difficult for us to do our jobs. We don't really matter. Yeah. Well, to wrap things up, I think we want to give a couple awards out. I think we'll do this on most of the episodes throughout the show. We're going to make these awards up kind of as we go along. But Jonny,
I've got 2 awards to give out. The first award is for the best British stiff upper lip, and it goes to Tom Pidcock for trying to conceal how like sort of gutted and upset he was that he didn't quite measure up to any expectations for stage 1, and how he was trying to say like how his confidence it wasn't where he wanted it to be, but he couldn't quite let himself really feel, which as a British man over a slightly similar age I respect and relate to. And then my second award is for the best understanding or best representation of like a slightly scripted reality TV show, because there's a scene where you have Tadej Pogacar at home with his partner. He's also a professional rider, Erska Ziga, which they don't mention in the show. And they go out to their outdoor furniture in Monaco, and she is sitting there with a coffee. And you always have to have your arm on the back of the seat when you're asking one of these scripted reality questions. And she basically asks him like, "Oh, Jonas Vingegaard was better than you last year, huh?" Which is not a question she would ever ask like her partner when they've had to really sort of figure this all out.
Now Jonas is the number one guy.
Yeah.
And you're the one who has to attack him.
It's obvious who is the main rival. It's Jonas.
So respect to both of them for going along with making a TV show.
A close battle in the Understanding the Assignment award between her and Jonathan Vaughters.
She was
for
great.
Sure.
Yeah, she was great.
But she definitely understood the assignment. Yeah. Kit, what do you got?
Well, I mean, I would like to present the idea that we actually name this award after the man himself, because he is obviously the biggest pro at it. But the Jonny Vaughters Award for just Jonny Vaughtersing it, which basically means bluster or enthusiasm, goes to Jonny Vaughters.
Congratulations!
We basically
JV.
covered why already. So
yeah.
Just to, there'll be other people who will win this award,
Okay.
but I think we should keep it with his name. But then I've also got I think that this is the playing up to the camera or the awkward in front of camera award, which this episode I'm going to give to Grisha Nierman, who often comes across very, very well, or at least very, very naturally, especially when he's swearing. But there's a moment on the team bus.
That is his natural state.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. But there's a moment in the team bus when he introduces what they're going to be doing, and it's completely. I mean, clearly they'd already had their briefing, and then they're like, "Okay, and now for Netflix," and he delivers again. I'm pretty sure. I mean, that's what I read from that moment on the bus.
Either that, or he's not a particularly inspiring figure. One of the two. Yeah.
With his shell
Listeners who
necklace.
also listen to our Tour Daily podcast and know our friend Josh Robertson from the Wall Street Journal, he had a preview screening or whatever of this series, and he actually sent me, he like videoed a bit on his phone to show me, and I don't know which episode it is, but I can't wait. But there are some peak Grisha Nierman coming up on the radio, just like, because obviously last year his iconic phrase was "You're fucking motorbike wild, go on," which has never been topped.
Yeah. Well, and the supercut swearing.
Do you think they've all they're all
That was
swearing
also
more
excellent.
now?
Yep.
Do you think they saw that and they were like, "Oh, okay"?
I think they just swear a lot.
There's a lot of
I
swearing.
think they all swear a lot. I think there's just a lot of swearing in the team cars.
Fuck! Lafayette wins. Lafayette wins with the late attack. Fucking hell.
So I have one for Grisha Nierman. He's a two-time winner in episode 1. Because he was also the first, and this is the award for each episode's Tour de France ism. And the first episode Tour de France ism champion is Grisha Nierman with "You cannot win the Tour de France today,
So
but
true.
you can lose it," which he says, I forget exactly where, but it's one of those things that is said in the first 10 days of every single Tour de France throughout the
First
entire
10
history
minutes.
of the Tour de France. First 10 minutes of the Tour de France every single year. And I, award to Grisha Nierman. So yeah, two-time champion out of episode 1. Congratulations, Grisha. I'm sure you're very proud. And
I really want, what we should do is on the Escape Collective website, we should sell merch where, it's like those things like mums by garden centres where it's like a quote with a beach background. It's like "leave only footsteps" or whatever. We should do them, but with like Tour de France isms. Like, we've all got backgrounds here. Like, imagine if you had like a sandy beach and it was like, "You can't win the tour on the first day, but you could definitely lose it." They would sell. And you just switch out what your mum has, but it's now a Tour de France.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Just take it day by day.
It's all good advice.
Just
Take
life.
it day by day. Yep. There was not that many Tour de France-isms in this first episode.
There were lots of cycling-isms, though.
There were a lot of cycling-isms. So, which brings me to sort of final question here before we wrap up this episode. Do you like it so far? Episode 1? Better, worse than last year? Are you into it?
I wasn't expecting to cry, which I did, I'll be honest. It was like I said at the beginning of the episode, at the top of the episode, when they're showing all the riders crying at the Tour de Suisse, because it's a very emotional moment. But yes, is my answer to the question. I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed it more than I remember enjoying last year as well. It was a neatly put together episode, and it's compelling.
I didn't cry because of the aforementioned emotional limits. But yeah, it was great. It was so much better. Like, I kind of enjoyed last year's, to be honest. Like, I'm happy to accept it for what it is. Like, I'm not there like worrying about, how it's been portrayed. But yeah, so much better. I also this is worrying. I forgot like a lot of the things that happened already. So like only like partway through stage 1 was like, oh yeah, and then the Yates brothers are about to go off the front, and it's because we spend all day in the car, so we don't see it all. Like the Basque Country, like that, those stages look unreal with all the fans.
Yeah.
But yeah, love it. I feel like they've also they had way more like just amazing establishing shots. Like they'd obviously borrowed some of the Giro ones. That's in episode 2, but or like the ones over Monaco and stuff like that. Just like they made it look way more a spectacle, which is how you watch the Tour on TV. Is that like half the time you're watching it because of the the amazing scenes, not just the racing. So yeah, loving it. I feel the characters are better. Also, sorry, final question for ask if you liked it, Caley. We didn't even touch on this episode. Thibaut Pinot throwing all of the stale croissants into his pond. How did we not have that anywhere on our run sheet? What's going on there?
Right?
I don't have a pond.
Huge error. So was he feeding
fish?
Was he feeding fish or fowl?
Fish, I'm pretty sure. They showed a shot of one of the croissants bobbing around. Yeah.
Okay.
French fish.
Evidently.
So this is my question. Like it's a pond. There's in theory things for fish to eat in it, right? Bugs, insects.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why they're there. Is he trying to fatten up the fish for some reason? What else is happening? So there's a couple moments in this episode that are kind of in the similar vein to this, which is like we didn't get anything actually about Thibaut Pinot, right? Like there was no reason to include. This was 100% foreshadowing.
Yes.
Right? Like we have a little bit of Marc Matteo in a car crying through fans, right? We got a little Pinot chucking croissant to fish, I guess. Croissant. Chucking them to fish. But like, why? I have no point in that whole thing, other than we know, because again, we watched the Tour de France last year. We know that there will be a moment later in the show that is quite poignant for Mr. Pinot. It is his last Tour de France. He's retiring at the end of the season, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a couple little bits in this first episode that are purely set up moments, and I think that is one of them.
Yeah. Sorry.
I guess I should answer my own question is whether I like it. Significantly better than last year. Significantly better than last year. So, and I think the big thing that for me comes back to the crash sequences in the first episode last year felt the same as like, so here NBC Sports or Peacock or whatever, like they always put crash reels together because it's what non-cycling fans are kind of draws them in, I guess. Like, I mean, it's just morbid curiosity watching this stuff happen, watching these guys hit the deck at 60 kilometers an hour in their underpants, basically. And last year it felt gratuitous. And I think, again, because of the quite poignant Gino Mater connection in this year's show, it felt like there was a purpose to it. Like it was really, again, for me, this whole first episode was about setting the stakes. It's about setting the stakes for these guys on a personal level, for them on a professional level individually, as well as, again, the Vaughters part is sort of setting the stakes for teams at the Tour de France. And so setting those three stakes was sort of why this episode really worked for me, and why I think it's going to tie into the next 7 episodes much better than it did last year. So I was impressed. I think it really worked, and it got me really excited about the Tour de France, which is coming up soon. So we'll be back with another episode of the Unchained Binge podcast in a couple days here. Head over to escapecollective.com if you want to check out what we do elsewhere. Make sure you look up the other Escape Collective podcasts. We do a daily Tour de France podcast called Tour Daily. Again, you can just search Escape Collective wherever you get your podcasts. We are on the ground in France. We chat through the day's stage. We talk to riders. We talk to directors. We get the real inside story. We bring you closer to the tour. Make sure that you check that out. And of course, for anybody who's discovering us for the first time here, I would be remiss not to mention the fact that we are 100% member funded, right? We don't have any advertisements. We don't have any other revenue streams. We are funded by the people who listen to our stuff and read our stuff, and you are our customer. So if you appreciate what we're doing and you like what we're doing and you want access to everything we do during the Tour de France, because we do paywall some things, you will hit a paywall on the site pretty quickly. Head over to escapecollective.com/member and sign yourself up. There might be a special deal, but when we first publish this, it won't be active yet. So, all right. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode in a little bit. Bye-bye.